Welcome. Let's talk about some key concepts in Hinduism at the beginning of this video here. I will put myself down in the corner here to be unobtrusive. First of all, the first two terms, Brahman and Atman, you should know very well. We've talked about these a lot in the first Hinduism video, so I will skip them here. Maya is a term that is usually used to mean illusion or the world of illusion. It can actually be used as a term for the universe itself, not with any negative intent at all. But again, the idea is that this world that we perceive is not the ultimate reality. It is illusory. And to treat this world as if it is the ultimate reality and orient ourselves according to it and be attached to it is what would be called avidya, or ignorance. Now, it does talk about the idea of ignorance in your text, but you'll notice here on this page it says, if you're using this book here, you'll notice here on this page that the term avidya is actually not included in the text that we're using this semester by Mary Pat Fisher, but I'd like you to know it. The last four terms here are the ones that I want to take the most time with, because if you understand these four terms well, you will have a very good understanding of Hinduism, actually. Karma, Dharma, Samsara, and moksha. Let's start with Samsara, how about? Samsara is something that is just a natural cycle. It really is not affected by you in any way, shape, or form. It has nothing to do with you. Samsara is the cycle that results in being reborn numerous times. And so it's often called the wheel of rebirth. But samsara is more than just the cycle that causes the human soul, the Atman, to transmigrate and be reborn in a different bodily form. It is a cycle of the universe, like the sun rising in the morning. It's going to happen whether you want it to or not. And I mentioned this in a previous video regarding reincarnation. You don't have to try to make it happen. It's going to happen. And by the way, it's a little bit more of a curse than it is of a blessing. If you're a monotheist, you might never have thought of this before, and the idea of, wouldn't it be nice to come back and live again? It might seem like a good idea to you, but just to reiterate, all of the world religions, when they look at this world, they find it inherently unsatisfactory. It is a world of suffering. It's a world of injustice. And when the world religions imagine the ultimate reality or the ultimate reward or whatever, it's always the absence of everything that causes suffering in this life. So if you're a Christian and you're trying to get to heaven, all of the things that you see that cause suffering, that are unjust, that are unfair in this world, everything that you would say is somehow a result of evil, you do not believe any of those things are going to be present in heaven. And it's the same thing with other religions that aren't even really thinking about a heaven per se. Still, when they think of the ultimate reality, they are thinking of a world or an existence where there is an absence of suffering, an absence of pain, an absence of injustice. Everything that makes this world unsatisfactory is remedied. So the question is this: if you feel this strongly about the flaws of this world, why would you want to come back to it over and over and over again? That just doesn't make much sense. The goal is to, of course, break out of this cycle of rebirth, and this is the last term here, moksha, we'll talk more about in a bit, to break out of this cycle of rebirth and not come back to this horrible existence of suffering anymore. So samsara is the wheel of rebirth. Brings you back time and time and time again until you finally are able to break out of the cycle altogether to attain moksha. So let's talk about how this works. First of all, we talked about the varna system, the caste system. And this, I'm going to give you the classical formulation here in Hinduism. But before I do this, let me just mention something. We're in the 21st century now. Many things have changed. We live in a world now where it is more acceptable to have your own opinions about things, and you don't necessarily have to correlate with any particular group. Now, there are some nations that are still pretty strict where maybe you can't do that, but India is a little bit more free-thinking. India went through its own how shall we say, kind of like a civil rights movement also in the 20th century, like we did in America. In fact, they were a little bit ahead of us when we talked about the different varnas and we talked about untouchables. We talked about Mohandas Gandhi, or Mahatma Gandhi, the title that is given to him, which means great soul or great spirit. And we did mention his quest to try and elevate the status and the benefits and the quality of life of those that we call untouchables, chandalas, or he called them, of course, Harajans, children of God. And so as the result of this campaign, as we mentioned, there was legislation passed in 1948, the same year that he died, that guaranteed that certain types of prejudice could not happen anymore, in terms of hiring untouchables for certain positions that they would not have been thought worthy of holding, in terms of denying them access to higher education, universities and so on, and in terms of denying them visas to leave the country. These were all problems, and this legislation alleviated these problems. So in the 21st century, a lot of these things have been undone, if you will. But when you start talking about traditional religious ideas, one of the things that you'll notice is that there are many people that still hang on to traditional ideas, even when we're in an age where so many people are thinking in a more, perhaps more evolved way about these things. And sometimes what you'll notice is the more traditional views are held onto in the smaller communities. In other words, the smaller towns and villages are going to tend to more resemble older ways of thinking, whereas in the big, urban centers, metropolises, where you have many businesses that have international contacts, and people are much more likely to develop relationships with others from other religions, societies, or whatever, you're going to find more people that no longer adhere to the restrictions, for instance, of the Varna system, of the caste system. Well, it's the same kind of way when you start looking at some of these concepts here. They're still basically believed in, but there might be some differences of opinion about how many lifetimes you actually have to go through before you might be able to break out of the cycle of reincarnation, samsara, and attain moksha. But let me tell you, classically, it was usually thought that you had to go through thousands of rebirths. So I'm going to present the classic idea here. And again, there might be some free-thinking Hindus, especially those that have had a lot of contact with other cultures and religions, that have modified their views on this. They may think that, it might only take a couple lifetimes to attain moksha if you're a virtuous person, but that's not generally the way it was thought of classically. Now, the idea classically is that you have to work your way up through all of the varnas, all of the different castes. And so if I live a very, very good life, and I accumulate a lot of good karma, we'll talk about it in a minute, I'll be reborn in a higher caste, a higher place in society, kind of a reward. And little by little, through patient perseverance over many lifetimes, I keep moving up higher and higher through the caste system till I finally reach the highest caste, which you know is the Brahmin caste, the priestly caste. And in that caste, I have the opportunity finally to have a deeper state of enlightenment, and to actually perhaps have sufficient karmic force to break out of the cycle of samsara altogether when I die. And at that point, I attain moksha, which is my goal, to be with God, to be with Brahman forever. That's the classic way it's thought of. And of course, people who are not embracing the caste system today and no longer believe that they have to observe those restrictions might have a different view of this. And I'm just letting you know, because you can ask 10 Hindus what they think about something, and you can sometimes get 10 different answers. Hinduism is not a religion like conservative Christianity or Islam, where you're required to all believe exactly the same thing, or you'll be put out of the particular community. Hinduism is not like that at all. It's always been a melting pot of all different kinds of traditions, all different kinds of beliefs, spiritual traditions. And as long as your spiritual discipline is producing good results in your life, it's making you a better person, helping you love your neighbor, helping you be a blessing to society, and so on, then your spiritual discipline is accepted because it's working the right way. And we've mentioned this a little earlier in the course, but just want to remind you of that. So the traditional way this works, again, many lifetimes moving up through the caste system. Now let's get down to the interesting part. How would you move up, with rebirth into a higher caste, or move down, possibly very, very far down if you've led a very evil life or something? How does this all work? Well, first of all, you have a principle of Dharma. Dharma is your social duty or your responsibility. And as we mentioned in the Code of Manu, it specifies very clearly what the responsibilities are for all of the different castes and subcastes. And it is not thought that you can have any kind of spiritual progress or attain any good karma unless you are fulfilling your Dharma well. And the verb that goes with Dharma is fulfill. I want you to just remember that, because sometimes when you remember the verb that goes with the concept, it helps you to remember how the concept works. The other verb that might go with Dharma, you could say perform perhaps, but I like fulfill better. The idea is that your Dharma is given to you at birth. You don't really pick it, but you do have to perform it. You do have to fulfill your social responsibility where you are born, in the vocational caste in which you are born, and you have to fulfill it with integrity. And there are many instructions about the right way to do that. So I say here social duty and responsibility as the definition, but I have to add something. And that is, you will sometimes see, say in glossaries, different definitions of the word Dharma. Sometimes you'll see something more like my definition here, social duty or responsibility, but sometimes you'll see something Dharma, religious practice. So the question is, which is right? Social duty and responsibility or religious practice? And the answer is yes, both of them, because they're the same thing. Today, in the 21st century, we've had over a couple of hundred years to get really comfortable with the idea of the separation of church and state, to get comfortable with the idea that some things are sacred, some things are secular, and we divide things up and think about them differently. But that is not the way it is in ancient societies at all, and certainly isn't the way it is in Hinduism. In fact, Hinduism is very, very famous for putting a great deal of stress on the necessity of fulfilling your social responsibility. And that is your religious practice. That is your religious duty as well. You're not going to have any progress in your religion if you're not fulfilling your Dharma. You want to fulfill it well. You want to fulfill it ethically. You want to be a blessing. And in fulfilling your Dharma, you want to try to love your neighbor as yourself. Now, if you have done this, what happens is you produce and accrue good karma. Let's stop for a second. I said produce and accrue. These are the two verbs I want you to remember with karma. You produce it. How do you produce it? The word karma literally means action. Of course, in this theological concept here, we're talking about the consequences of your action. Every action has a result, kind of like a cosmic echo, if you will, of what you've done. And that karma is produced by you, but it also accrues to you. It's got your name on it, so to speak. And that karma is going to affect you. There's a lot of misunderstanding about karma today. In terms of Hinduism, most people, if you know anything about it, understand that the better your karma, the more likely you're going to have what we call a more fortunate rebirth. You'll be reborn in a higher caste. That's not the only way karma works. Secondly, in our country here, the United States of America, and I know some places in Western Europe especially, are talking also about karma as if it is something that we expect to see manifested or completed in our lifetimes. For instance, maybe on social media, you see that someone has been very, very mistreated. Maybe it's a lady who was taken advantage of by a man who, used her and took her resources and left her heart broken. And then you'll see very, very compassionate, well-meaning friends leaving comments on the thread saying, don't you worry, girl, karma's going to get him. You know, oh, look out, here comes karma. And you see this kind of thing all the time. Now, this is interesting because if karma always did what it was supposed to do, then we wouldn't think of this as an unjust world, now would we? Because karma would always get its man or woman, so to speak, and no offense would go unpunished. But you all know that's not the way the world is, right? Now, you can show cases where karma has worked. I can tell you maybe 10 stories about how karma really, slapped somebody down that really, really needed some punishment. But what I'm doing when I offer you these evidences of how karma works is I'm doing something called cherry picking. I'm picking examples or data that reinforces the conclusion I want to make, and I'm ignoring anything that doesn't. If there were 1,000 cases where something bad happened to people, and in 100 of those cases, the person who had hurt them, something bad happened to them in a fairly quick period of time that seemed very, very appropriate. But the other 900 cases, nothing happened. The person was never knowingly punished or went through any kind of repercussions as the result of the evil things that they did. So if I want to prove to you that karma works, I'm not going to use examples from the 900 cases that didn't work. I'm going to pick only examples from the 100 cases that did work. And since you only know the examples I gave you, it makes it seem like it works in every example. Well, it does in the examples I gave you, but I'm cherry picking. I'm selectively picking the data that reinforces my conclusion. The fact of the matter is, karma doesn't work the way we think it should. It doesn't produce the justice that we're looking for the vast, vast majority of the time. And that's why all religions consider this world to be unsatisfactory. That's one of the main reasons, is moral chaos. It just doesn't seem like there's any repercussions. Now, in Christianity and Islam and Judaism, some forms of Judaism, the idea is that, well, there's a God that is going to judge you after your lifetime, and then you're going to get what you deserve, even though you may not have gotten it in this lifetime. Hinduism does not see it as a God sitting on a throne making some arbitrary judgment about you after one life. They see this as something that works itself out over many lives. And the way that you need to understand this is that karma works in different ways. Now, the way I just explained it would be a quicker karmic return. And sometimes people might even talk about an instant karmic return. If somebody does something wrong, and within the next couple days, it just seems like karma just slaps them right on down. You're like, whoa, instant karmatic return. But sometimes in this life, you don't see any karmatic return at all. Which brings us back to what I was just talking about. And this is the next way that karma works, and that is in facilitating your rebirth. So whatever you, do in this life where you don't get what you deserve, the idea is your reincarnation is going to be affected by that. So if you've lived a very good life, you'll probably have a more fortunate rebirth. Your karma will cause you to be reborn in a better situation. And of course, if you have had a bad life and you've done bad things, karma might knock you down a number of levels. Maybe you'll be reborn as a slug or something, and you're gonna have to start from the beginning trying to get it right if you've lived a really bad life. Obviously, it's easier to fall than it is to climb. Everybody knows this. How long does it take to build a good reputation? Well, a lifetime. How long does it take to lose it? I don't know, about 15 seconds on YouTube. Get my point? How long does it take to climb up a mountain safely? A couple weeks, How long does it take to get to the bottom? Doesn't take that long at all. Assuming you don't care about living when you hit the bottom, just jump off. So it is easier to fall, and Hindus know this. And so it's through patient perseverance in well-doing over many lifetimes that you attain the goal. So this really does motivate people to be consistent in living virtuous lives and fulfilling their social responsibility. Anyway, back to karma. The second way this works is to facilitate your rebirth. Now, there's a third aspect, and if you have a lot of good karma, or you have a lot of bad karma, then perhaps all of your karma may not be exhausted in facilitating your rebirth. And some of that karma that wasn't expended or exhausted in facilitating your rebirth may follow you into the next life and continue to affect you until it is finally exhausted, until it finally runs out. Now, this is an important concept. If you are trying to understand how there could be justice in the world, because Hinduism shows you how there can be. Let me give you an example. Let's say you have a next door neighbor. She's a wonderful person. She cares about people. She would never hurt anyone knowingly. She gives money to feed the poor. She does lots of good things. And yet horrible stuff is always happening to this poor lady. You've probably known people like this, right? In fact, there are cartoonists that kind of make fun of this, like a Charlie Brown or something, where everywhere he walks around, there's that cloud over his head raining on him, while everybody else around him is out in the sun. It's fine. It's like the cloud is just right over him. But it's funny to think about sometimes. But the fact of the matter is, Hinduism explains this kind of thing. Your poor next door neighbor, the reason she has these horrible things happening to her, even though she's a really good person, and obviously creating, producing, accruing a lot of good karma, why is the bad stuff happening to her? Because she still has bad karma from her previous life that has not yet been expended, has not yet been exhausted, and it's continuing to affect her. There may come a time in her life where it's finally exhausted, and then all of a sudden the good karma, starts working well for her, and she has a much more blessed life. Or maybe if she has a lot of good karma, a lot of bad karma from the last life, it's never fully expended. Maybe she kind of has misfortunes to the end of her life. But that does not mean all of her good deeds are in vain. Not at all. She's storing up tons of good karma that are going to affect her in a great way in terms of her reincarnation, and probably a lot of it will follow her into her next life as well. So she's not in any way wasting her time trying to be a good person. She just may not see the results of that very quickly, because she's still got to burn off some of this bad karma, so to speak. Now, the same idea would work. Imagine that there is somebody who has climbed up the corporate ladder or political ladder or whatever, and is very powerful, and has been somewhat ruthless in the way that they campaigned for higher and higher positions of more and more power, stepping on thousands of little people along the way with no concern for anyone but themselves. And of course, this is a very unethical person. This is a person that is producing and accruing tons of bad karma. But yet, in their life now, they almost seem to have the Midas touch. It seems like everything they do is blessed. There's like some favor resting on them. And the way a Hindu would answer this is, well, in their last life, they must have been a much better person. And so a lot of this good karma that was not expended in facilitating their rebirth has followed them into this life and continues to affect them. So once again, though, that doesn't mean that the bad things that this person is doing are not going to come back to haunt him or her someday. Maybe that good karma runs out in their lifetime here, and all of a sudden they take a huge fall. And we've seen some very important and powerful people take huge falls. But even if he keeps this kind of blessing of favor on his life till the day he dies, when he dies, all that bad karma he has produced and accrued is going to bitch slap him down numerous levels. So he's not getting away with anything. Now, just to make sure you understand before I go on, ask yourself, the girl next door, in her last life, was she in a higher or a lower caste? If you want, you can pause the video and think about it. I ask students in class, and sometimes it's pretty well divided 50-50. But if you said she was in a higher caste in her last life, you were right. Now let me explain why. Because what's working in her life right now? Bad karma, right? That means it's the bad karma that's left over after facilitating her rebirth. What does bad karma do? It moves you down. So if in her rebirth she was moved down, that means she was at a higher level in her last life. That makes sense? Now, apparently she had more privileges and she blew it and she abused people or whatever. So now she's been knocked down to a lower position, and some of this bad karma is still working. Apply it to the other guy with the Midas touch, our powerful world leader or whatever. He was obviously in a lower position in his last life, and he apparently was a very virtuous person, stored up lots of good karma, and as a result, in this life, he's put in a position where he can affect many lives and has a great deal of power. Of course, he's not using it the right way to be a blessing. He's hurting other people to promote himself, and he's storing up all kinds of bad karma. And he's going to get slapped down so far, it'll be many lifetimes before he gets back up to this place again, to try to live ethically as a person with power. Now, there's one advantage to this system. And in my other course I've been teaching, REL-2000, we talk a lot about this when we discuss, it's more of a thematic course. We take different religious themes, but there's a later chapter where we talk about theodicy. And theodicy really focuses on the fact that the world is not fair. And why do bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people? And if you happen to believe in a righteous God, then what's wrong here? I mean, if God is really, righteous and loving and fair and kind and doesn't want, evil to be unfairly affecting you, and on the other hand, God really is all powerful and in control of everything, then injustice shouldn't exist. This kind of evil shouldn't exist. If God can do anything he wants and is in control of everything, and he doesn't want evil to exist, evil would not exist. So you've either got one of two possibilities. Either God is not all-powerful and he can't stop it from existing, or else he actually does want it to exist, which means in both cases you need further explanation. How is it that he's God but he's not completely in control? Or how is it that he's God and he's supposed to be the highest ethical standard and yet he still wants evil to exist? So whichever way you go, you have to explain this much more deeply. And it is a very deep conversation. It's something that philosophers and theologians have been contemplating and debating and so on for thousands of years. So again, of all of the different solutions, all of the different kinds of theodicy that are proposed, Hinduism comes the closest to, first of all, explaining how this could be a really just world and presenting it in a way that it's not that difficult to understand. In many other religions, God has a plan. Yeah, but that doesn't really answer the question. Basically, what you're saying is, I can't possibly understand the answer to the question, so I just need to have faith, even though everything seems marvelously unjust. You don't have the problem in Hinduism for a number of reasons. First of all, samsara is a natural force. Karma is also a natural force. There aren't gods making arbitrary decisions. What you do is either ethical or it's not, and the universe knows it and it remembers. And so if there is something that looks unfair, in terms of how you're being treated in this life, it is completely fair if you could see your last life, which of course you can't. Now, there are some people, when we get to Buddhism, we'll see that Siddhartha Gautama is one of those people who in deep meditation breaks through to an enlightenment where he gets glimpses of his past lives. And there are stories like that. But of course, the vast majority of people can't see their past lives. Just like if you believe in heaven, you can't see heaven. The reason that you believe in these things is not because you have any kind of scientific evidence they're true. It's because it works for you. It fulfills your ultimate concern to believe that life really does have meaning and purpose. It isn't all moral chaos. There is some justice in the world. And we really, really want to believe that. And this is something else we've talked about quite a few times, so I'll move on from here. So you've got basically the whole system here through living ethically, treating your neighbors, yourself, fulfilling your social duty and responsibility. Ethically, you produce and you accrue good karma. And this good karma may affect you in this life, but whether it does or not, it's going to affect your rebirth in a very good or very bad way, depending. And after it has affected your rebirth, some of the karma you produce in this life that is not yet expended or extinguished might follow you into your next life and continue to affect you for a while. Technically, if bad things are happening to you, you do deserve it. Okay? Maybe not in this life, but it's the same soul in a different body in a different situation. In your past life, that soul did things that it deserves to be punished for. It's just happening in this life. And so that's the way that Hindus explain this. So in Hinduism, the universal problem is samsara. The universal problem is always getting sucked right back into this life again over and over and over again. But the goal, of course, the ultimate goal is moksha. And that is after a number of lifetimes, whether you believe it's a few or many, whether you believe it has anything to do with moving up through the caste system anymore, After a number of lifetimes, if you have lived ethically and you have a great deal of good karma, you may finally be able to break out of the cycle of samsara and attain moksha and be with God in bliss forever. We're going to talk a lot more about different conceptions of what it's like to be with God in bliss forever a little bit later on. Moving on here, we're going to talk a little bit more about Dharma. Now, these distinctions here are not in your text, but they're important distinctions that I feel like should have been included. So let's talk about them. Let's talk about Dharma. The kind of Dharma we've been talking about is called varnashrama Dharma. Varna, of course, is your caste, your vocational clan or tribal clan, and ashrama is your stage of life, right? Well, what determines your Dharma? What determines your Dharma is your caste and your stage of life, your varna and your ashrama. And one other thing that determines your Dharma too is also your gender, because obviously males and females, at least classically, do not have the same functions in society. Males can't have children and nurture them. And there was a time when females, were not going to battle as soldiers. They weren't in government. They weren't running business. They were running households. And so they're seen as having different social functions, even if they're both considered to be just as important. So what would determine your varnashrama Dharma is, again, your varna, your ashrama, as you can see it in the word, varnashrama, and gender, of course. So your social duties, if I am we talked about this a little bit when we were talking about the varnas and the stages of life. For instance, in the brahmacharya stage, when I am learning what I need to learn to move into the grihastha stage, what I'm learning has to do with what my varna is, has to do with what my social responsibility is going to be. The son of a Raja is not learning the same things as the son of a merchant or a son of a shepherd or the son of a Brahmin for that matter. And we kind of talked about this before. Now, there is another dharmic distinction here, and we call this sanatana dharma. By the way, can't remember if I mentioned this before, but the A's on the end of a lot of Sanskrit words in Hinduism come and go. Instead of seeing dharma, you might just see dharm. Instead of karma, you might see karm. There's lots of examples. But this is another one. Instead of sanatana, you might see sanatan, just without that last A. And sometimes you'll see sanatan ved dharma. And ved is the root of the word Vedas. In any case, whether it's sanatana dharma or sanatan ved dharma, it's talking about the eternal dharma. What's your ultimate goal? Moksha. You're seeking to liberate your Atman, right? So what is your ultimate responsibility, your ultimate religious responsibility? That ultimate responsibility is to get your soul free. It is to break out of the cycle of samsara and attain moksha. That is, and here's why we say eternal, because that is everybody's sanatana dharma. We all have the same sanatana dharma. Our ultimate responsibility is to pursue moksha, is to get our soul free. So we all have the same sanatana dharma. We all have the same ultimate goal. However, based on your varnashrama dharma, you may be doing very, very different things in this lifetime than I'm doing. I'm a teacher. Maybe, you're a banker or you're something else, and we might be in different family situations. We might have more or less responsibility over other people's lives. So you have a very different varnashrama dharma from me, probably. So many different varnashrama dharmas. We all have our own varnashrama dharma based on varna, ashrama, and gender, but we all have the same sanatana dharma. And if I'm fulfilling my varnashrama dharma as a teacher and I'm trying to fulfill it well, I'm doing it because my ultimate concern is my sanatana dharma, this ultimate goal of attaining moksha. Why is this important? Because sanatana dharma, one reason, it's considered by many Hindus to be the best name for their religion. If you go to Google and punch in sanatana dharma or sanatana dharma, you're going to get lots and lots of hits, and you're going to see lots and lots of articles talking about what Hinduism is all about. Sanatana dharma actually tells you something about what Hindus believe. And that is your ultimate goal, is to get your soul free from this crazy cycle of samsara that won't let you go. How about, the term Hinduism? Well, it doesn't mean anything. It's actually a geographic term, if you haven't thought about that. It was coined fairly recently, by the way, to refer to any of those different kinds of religions, and there are many different spiritual traditions and religious disciplines and beliefs and stuff, but anything that comes out of that area, you know, at or beyond the Indus River Valley, we kind of call Hinduism. Indus, Hindu, India, Hinduism, it's all the same thing. It's a geographic term, whether you add the H or you don't. So it's basically saying Indianism. It's kind of like, you know, I live in Florida. If somebody asked me what my religion was and I said Floridianism, it has no meaning. It's a geographic term. And lots of terms are like that. I mean, when you think of like the second oldest world religion next to Hinduism, which is Judaism, okay, Judaism, you know, Judah is a person, Judah is a tribe, and Judah is a country. It's a geographic term. It doesn't really actually tell you what anybody believes to call it Judaism. It just basically says that it somehow comes from a guy or a tribe named Judah. So, again, Sanatana Dharma would be a more meaningful term. In our next video, we are going to talk about the Bhagavad Gita and some of the wisdom that it holds, that whether you're religious or not, you can actually apply to your life in a way that will be beneficial. It's also where we learn about the three major margas, the major religious paths, and we learn an awful lot about a particular part of Hinduism we would call Vaishnavism, and those are those that worship the god Vishnu. And for them, he is in fact the highest god, the greatest manifestation of Brahman. And this story, the Bhagavad Gita, is very, very precious to those who worship Vishnu. Well, it's precious to many Hindus, because obviously all the gods are manifestations of Brahman. But if you happen to be a Vishnu worshiper, the story is particularly precious to you. And we're going to talk about this in the next video, and I will see you then.